Thank you very much. I give the floor now to Mohab Anis, he's professor at the American University of Cairo. Mohab, yes, you are with us. Very glad to meet you. We worked also together within this the Next Society initiative. What we'd like to know from you is what happens during this crisis, how the startups, the innovators manage to turn around their activity, to evolve in their strategy. What kind of innovation did emerge from this crisis, and what's going to happen in the next months and in relation to this dynamic of innovators and startups? It's yours. Thank you again for being with us.
All right, thank you very much, Emmanuel. I hope everyone can hear me, and thank you for having me on this call. I'm
very well. If you can maybe I don't know, shout to put the volume a little bit up for the microphone, and that would be perfect.
Can you hear me now very well?
Yes, we hear you well.
Okay, fantastic. So I would just want to thank you for having me on this call. And today, actually, I want to talk to you a little bit about some research that we have been doing over the past year and a half, and maybe just give you a brief about 10 very specific principles that we were able to conclude that can certainly help organizations, whether they are businesses, governments, or from the developing world, to deal with some of the challenges that were associated with the COVID-19. So I'm a professor at the American University in Cairo, but I'm also the CEO at Innovating. And just to tell you a brief about Innovating, we are an innovation management consultancy with offices in Cairo and in Beirut. And we've been working on areas related to strategy, technology transfer, and SME support over the past 12 years. So to go straight into the topic, basically what we looked at, that I was part of the board of the Global Innovation Management Institute, where we looked at different type of behaviors that have been taking place because of the COVID-19 situation. And we came to realize that the behavior of people have actually been changing. So what we looked at 10 different behaviors, and we tried to come up with a set of principles that would allow businesses to adopt in order to sustain what they're doing and in order to grow properly, so that eventually they can continue to have a competitive advantage and be able to come up with new business models. So I want to walk you through these 10 innovation principles. And I guess the main objective here is that if you are coming from a business, please look at these innovation principles very carefully, try to adopt them. If you are coming from the government, these are some of the principles that I think you can look at developing programs around. And if you are coming from the development world, some of your products and services can actually perhaps change the way that you present it using some of these principles. So let me just go through some of these principles that we've been seeing around the world, and particularly in the Mediterranean region. The first principle is called the decentralized operations, and it's really coming from that people don't want to be living in or staying in crowded places many of its time. So we've seen that a lot of business, such as restaurants, instead of going to a particular location to eat and to access food, there's another location that has now been created for picking up food. So the idea of that not every kind of operation has to happen in a centralized form. If you can decentralize these operations, it can actually be quite beneficial. In hospitals, we've seen external clinics. In gyms, we've seen equipment being rented out to people so that they can, instead of coming to the gym in one confined place, they can work with these equipment in different places. And for government, and we've seen that in Egypt in particular, that we started seeing government kiosks being placed in malls and different other locations to allow people not to go to the ministry anymore to finish up their work, but they can do this in a more decentralized way. So this is one of the things that we've been seeing over the past year being accelerated. The other principle that we saw, something called do-it-yourself, which was kind of interesting because in some of the southern Mediterranean countries, people usually like to see other people providing them with certain help and certain access to certain services. But here we saw actually a different principle, which is that people are now comfortable with doing things themselves in order to, because they might be a little bit worried about, a person coming too close, having, for example, some kind of illness or corona or whatever. So we've seen that in restaurants, in pizza shops. Instead of sending you pizza, you can actually have a box where it has all the different components of the pizza, and you build the pizza yourself. We've seen that in barber shops, that people are doing their hair cutting on their own. We've seen that in hotels, in the hospitality sector, that people are doing self check-ins on their own. So this is actually a changing behavior that we've been seeing, which is that people are more okay to do things on their own versus actually being served. The third principle that we saw that actually came up because of the corona situation is the idea of having protective barriers. Of course, because of the worry, we've seen this taking place in transportations, in Ubers, for example, where you have these barriers between the driver and the passenger. We've seen that in retail stores where we have the plexiglass at the cashier. We've seen it actually in new products that are being developed to like hygiene hooks, so that you don't have to touch the doorknobs every single time. And actually, they started looking at certain different types of materials that can act as a coating to any kind of public places. So researchers have been looking at coatings that would reduce the lifetime of the virus. And that was acting as a protective barriers to many of the public places. This is actually principle number 3. Principle number 4 had to do with the idea that people have become very conscious about being with the hygiene and being certified clean. We've seen this in many different sectors, actually. One, we've seen it in the food sector, where we find, for example, a startup like in menus in Egypt and in Lebanon, where they started defining hygiene and virus-free practices in terms of how you handle food, and to put kind of a label to the kind of food that gets delivered to you. And this means that the food is being certified clean. We've seen that also in these disinfecting cars and in disinfecting the packages in e-commerce businesses. We've seen that even with delivery people, that you're able to monitor the temperature of the delivery person who's coming to you. And we've seen that also in hotels, where there are certain measures related to how certified clean is a hotel and the room and the pillows and the mattresses and so forth. So this concept of certified clean has become important. We've seen that in passports, where you have a vaccine label. That's basically another idea of being certified clean. So this is a principle that has been accelerated significantly over the past 1 year. The next principle that has also been emerging very, very powerfully is the idea called time segmentation. Like, we're all very used to the idea of market segmentation, I'm pretty sure. But here we talk about time segmentation, which is the idea that people do not go to the same place at the same time. So we've seen that, for example, in retail stores that allocate the first hour of the day for elderly people to shop. We've seen that with rotational shifts in workplaces. And we've seen startups that are developing applications for banks, for example, so that people can actually book their appointments and book the time slots that they want to go to the bank, instead of going to the bank and finding it too crowded. So this idea of time segmentation and developing technologies and applications based on this principle has actually been accelerating quite significantly. The next principle, and I think this goes without saying, but which is the idea of touchless solutions. Okay, but this has actually opened up a very large array of different technologies. We've seen technologies such as holographic solutions, using holograms. Instead of going to the elevator and touching the different buttons and worrying who is touching the buttons before me, now there's a technology, a hologram technology, which allows you to touch the buttons in the air. Things like, for example, locks. Instead of using your hand, there are technologies such as ultrasonic contactless access control, or using the eye retina instead of the fingerprints for accessing certain locations. We've seen it in airports where you have a lot of contactless technologies so that you can cross the custom line very easily. And finally, we've seen some startups working on some AI-enabled applications such as shopping carts to make sure that you're able to shop without actually going through the cashier by calculating exactly what kind of articles have you put in the cart and how much you need to pay. The other principle that actually was very important, and I think this we all agree about this, is that there has been a significant acceleration of virtual and digital technologies over the past year and a half. And this really affected like everything. Looking at financial services, that you can actually have guidance and receive advisory services from your financial advisors online. You can also do that from the healthcare point of view, also receiving receiving advice online from your doctor, from your nurse. We've seen this being transforming summits. We are now having this conference online, and there are applications that now create this kind of these virtual conferences and manage these virtual expos. And also in the real estate, we've seen the boom of things like augmented reality and virtual reality, so that you're able to see the kind of property before you actually go there. So digital and virtual has been a technology that has significantly been accelerated over the last years. And speaking of digital, perhaps the very last one is the idea of paperless, that we've seen a lot of digital transformation taking place in the Southern Mediterranean in particular. We're talking about financial services, instead of having receipts in paper, we have e-receipts, e-tickets, and even in healthcare, instead of having normal prescriptions, things are becoming e-prescription now. So there are actually a lot of startups that have been working in these kind of technologies that are related to digital transformation. And the two other principles, the one thing is called one-time usage, where you create products that you use one time and then you let it go. So in some of the French, for example, hotels, they actually create what we call zero waste cosmetics in hotels. So this is, for example, a toothpaste, but it's a zero waste toothpaste, where you take one of the tablets and then it basically foams up into the actual toothpaste when you actually try to brush your teeth. We've seen it with disposable menus. So the idea here is to try to come up with something which is a disposable model versus something where you use once and twice. And finally, the idea of using robots in so many of our life, retail, healthcare. Like I remember in Egypt, and I believe in Jordan, it was a month ago, the first surgeon operation was done using actually robots, and what was done from a remote sites, and this was pretty spectacular. We've seen it also in pharmas, where you have robots that would open certain shelves to give you the medicine that you need. So the conclusion here is that these are 10 innovation principles that have really been accelerated over the past 1.5 years. And if you're a business, I recommend that you look at these principles, see how can you apply any of those. If you're an industry association, try to promote these principles to some of your businesses. And if you're government, look at these principles, and perhaps this can advise you to some of the programs and policies that you can put in place. And of course, if you're coming from the development world, a lot of the services that you are providing now to your beneficiaries can actually take a different form if you apply some of these principles. And thank you so much, and I hope to answer any of your questions.
Way for each kind of organization is very, very interesting. Thank you for the analysis. We already have a comment. I think it's from Blanca Moreno. You did comment, or no? It's not you. So it's Zoe, a colleague of mine who is using another name. So she's saying, what about the new ways to foster collaboration and social interactions to balance these new barriers and fragmentation? I don't know if you want to elaborate, Zoe, to speak.
Sure. So very quickly, there are some of these principles, such as the barriers, right? Creating social barriers that probably will disappear after 6 months or maybe a year from now. And I agree with you that this will eventually disappear. However, when you look at other types of barriers, such as some of these coatings, the material coatings that you can apply in a certain way to reduce the lifetime of the virus, that will probably stay. So I think what the idea here is that if you look at these principles, try to figure out which ones are probably going to be eliminated over the next 1 year, and which ones are actually going to stay, and what kind of form is it going to take so that it continues to be with us over the years.